Okay, so let's start the colloquium this week. So we have Rania Anchen, so from visiting us from the Stewart Observatory in Tucson at the University of Arizona. So just a little bit of background. So she did the PhD in Bangalore in India in 2020, more or less.
Yeah.
And then did the postdoc in Inter-University Center for Astronomy and Astrophysics.
Yes.
I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I never realized the whole name. And then she was working as a research engineer, developing instrumentation for the next generation of 30-meter telescopes that are going to be built. Well, one of them, the European, is being built in Chile, and the GMT also in Chile, and the TMT, the 30-meter telescope, who knows where, but maybe in Hawaii or the Canary Islands. So the background is a lot is like developing instrumentation in polarimetry, but also in optical and UV. Interestingly, I'm gonna say what I didn't know this today. So it's working on instrumentation for a privately funded 3-meter space telescope funded by
Erica.
Google,
Yeah.
ex-Google people. So it's very interesting that now we have like very rich people from tech companies actually building space telescopes and astrophysical centers where they're reaching universities to build instrumentation in this case, which is very interesting. So now today she's going to be talking about small sats from next generation 30-meter class telescopes and polarimetric observations. Well, thank you.
Thanks, Enrique.
Oh, yeah, right. There.
Okay. So the current and the future next 10 years of astronomy looks very bright for us because we have a lot of telescopes, both space and ground, which are doing a lot of observations. Like we have JWST already on orbit, and Hubble has been there since 1990s, and by the end of this year, we are going to have Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope launched, and Habitable Worlds is going to come in 2040s. And in the case of ground-based, we have been using Keck and VLT, which are a 10-meter class telescope, for a very long period of time. And in the next 5 or 6 years, we are going to have these next generation 30-meter class telescopes. So with these telescopes, we know how to do imaging really well. Like we know how to get the imaging observations, we know how to characterize these systems, and we also know spectroscopy, like how to get the chemical composition from any of the astronomical source. But in addition to that, when we get light, when we collect light to do imaging or spectroscopy, light also contains some information, which is its polarization. So polarimetry, if it is done in conjunction with either imaging or spectroscopy, can give us a complementary information, and which about the structure of the source or about the composition, like dust composition, if there is a dust or if there is an asymmetry in the source, it can give us another bit of information, which is not available just by imaging or spectroscopy. So polarimetry has been very useful for us in the last 30 years where we have done, but also it's also an ignored field. Like we don't think of polarimetric instrumentation as the first instrument you put at any telescope. We think of imaging and spectroscopy, but polarimetry has equally a good amount of science and good amount of data you can extract to understand anything about astronomy. So just for the basic, I know all of you know about polarization of light, and most of us use polarized sunglasses to block one of the electric field orientations. So this is electromagnetic wave, and electric field vector is oscillating perpendicular to the direction of propagation. So you can call a light to be polarized when this electric field vector keeps oscillating in the same direction. So at an instantaneous time, every light, the direction of electric field vector is polarized, but always polarization is looked at a time average quantity. Like if you are observing any kind of astronomical source, it's like the integration time, where you collect the electric field vectors of many oscillations in order to say whether the light is polarized or not. And as I said, we have polarized light everywhere in our daily systems. Like this is me rotating a linear polarizer in front of our computer monitor, which is also polarized to some extent. And this is when you are trying to avoid reflection. So I just noticed that Max was here like a couple of months ago, and this is a picture he took at UCSB where he was on the beach and he rotated his polarized sunglasses to see what kind of reflection it can block. So the glint from the reflected rays is usually horizontally polarized, and your sunglasses you use is vertically polarized, so it can block that direction of electric field vibration. So that's why we use polarized sunglasses for avoiding like glares from either the reflections from the sky or the glares from any kind of water source. So in astronomy, polarization has been giving us very useful, rich information. Starting from interstellar dust. So one important thing to remember about polarization is when you have a circularly symmetrical source, it never produces polarization because it has electric field vibrations in all the directions and they cancel out when you time average. But when you discover polarization or when you find out polarization, it's always because it's a consequence of breakage of symmetry or some kind of scattering process which is happening in the system. So in the case of interstellar dust, the starlight is unpolarized and it passes through these interstellar dust grains which are aligned in a particular direction because of the presence of interstellar magnetic fields. And you can observe that one kind of polarization passes through. So when we can measure this polarization, we can also indirectly measure what kind of magnetic fields are making these dust grains align in a particular direction. And in the case of transients, where we see nova and supernova, where you have these explosions, you can see if there is a distribution of the material aspherically around it, or if there is an asymmetry in the distribution of its structure, you can get polarization values. And this is a case where we look at asteroid belts or Kuiper belts in other solar systems, which are called circumstellar debris disks. And since they are predominantly made up of dust grains, they scattered light. And once the light is getting scattered, then you observe polarization. And this polarization helps us. Do you have a question? Yeah.
Are you implying that there is a magnetic field here also?
This one is dust.
Okay, so
yeah.
So previous picture, magnetic field was essential.
Yeah.
But here, for some reason, the dust is planar and scattering in a particular.
Yeah, in this case, dust can. It also depends on like for dust to be aspherical, and also they are aligned. So that is a difference. And in this case, even magnetic fields are present, but they are not detectable. It's very low value. But the most polarization is coming from scattering.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So in the these are the simulations which was done for an exoplanetary case. Like if you are looking at an exoplanet system and it has different kind of features in its atmosphere. For example, if there is an ocean on exoplanet, or if there is a rainbow, or if there are some kind of Rayleigh scattering from exoplanet, and if you look at the polarization fraction, it can vary depending on the wavelength. So depending on what kind of polarization fraction you observe, you can say what is present on this exoplanet. Although we have not detected polarization from an exoplanet till now. So these are the models which we could use for future space telescopes in order to say that, okay, if we detect polarization, what kind of information we can get from this planetary system. So since the polarization is defined by electric field vibration, you cannot measure amplitude of the electric field. So what we do in the terms of measurement is intensity based. So we use Stokes parameters, which are IQ/UV, where I is the total intensity and Q is the polarization along X and Y axis. This is your coordinate system, and you try to measure where is this electric field vector oscillating, whether it is in this plane or this plane, and that you can measure by measuring the intensity. Like you decompose these two into X and Y coordinate, and you measure EX and EY basically. So that's what will give you Q and U, which correspond to linear polarization. And V corresponds to circular polarization, and so it can be right circular or left circular, and we get degree of linear and circular polarization. So Stokes parameters is a very easy way of measuring polarization in anywhere. So what kind of instruments do we use? So we can use imaging or a spectropolarimeter. So if you're doing a conventional imaging, so you won't have a Wollaston or half-wave plate, though usually the telescope beam is focused using couple of lenses on the focal plane. So for polarimeter, we add a component called a half-wave plate, which is a modulator, and a Wollaston prism, which can split the incoming light into two orthogonal components. So if we are just using just a simple polarizer, the way to measure is you rotate the polarizer to get your polarization at different orientations. You get a 0, you rotate to 90, you rotate to 45 and 135. But whereas this is a most efficient way because you don't have to do 4 rotations, because you have an optical component which can divide it into I0, I90. And you rotate the half-wave plate, basically you're rotating your plane of polarization and trying to measure 45 and 135, and that's why we use it as a modulator, and we get I45 and I135. And the way we measure Q and U is if you subtract I0, I90 intensities, we get what is the polarization in the Q plane, and if you subtract I45 and I135, you get what is the polarization in U. So for example, this is how the detector or the CCD image for an imaging polarimeter look like. So you have two images for one, but if you're looking at a star, you have two different images. And if you're looking at an unpolarized source, then these two images have almost the same counts. So when you subtract them, you have no polarization. And if they're polarized to one particular, imagine if they're polarized 100% to I0, then you have only this star, and this component will not be there. So because it is polarized to only one level. And similarly, if you're doing spectroscopy, you have two spectra instead of one spectra. So that's the only difference between the normal imaging. You have your total light getting divided into two different channels if you're doing dual channel polarimetry. And this is what is used to observe stars, galaxies, or transients, and even solar system objects. The next one is high contrast polarimetry. This is used when you want to look at exoplanets or circumstellar debris disks where you have to block the starlight. So that's when we use this polarimeter in conjunction with an adaptive optic system and a chronographic system, where you block the starlight, and we have the modulator and polarizing beam splitter, and this is exactly how we measure. So yeah, just to give you more flavor of this high contrast polarimetry, so this is how we go through the two channels. Like you have the half-wave plate angle here, so you have 0 and you measure I0 and I90, and usually 2 rotations of half-wave plate is sufficient to get this 2 Stokes parameters. So we do it 2 more times in order to reduce error and increase the accuracy of measurement. And we subtract these two, we get Q, and we subtract these two, we get U, and we get those again, and we average these two to get Q and U parameters. And finally, we repeat this cycle as many number of times as we want until we achieve the required signal to noise. And so this is the Q and U parameters, and finally you can see polarized intensity and total intensity. So just to give you the a difference, like total intensity images, you don't see the scattering from the dust grains, but whereas in polarized intensity, it's very easy to see. Yeah.
Are those how do the images correspond to the same regions of the sky?
Yeah, it's the same. Yeah, it's the same angle, same region of the sky. So you can see the scattering from this, so which shows that polarized intensity contains always an information which is not present in your total intensity. So if you compare, if you use both the data and try to understand like what exactly is the composition of your system, it is much easier to constrain compared to just the total intensity alone. So in this talk, I'm going to talk about all the 3 different kinds of polarimeters which I've worked on in the last 5 to 6 years. So I worked on high contrast polarimetry for Roman Space Telescope chronograph, and this is a newly funded Pioneers mission called Puffins, which is for a UV spectropolarimetry survey of stars. And the last one is, I've also been trying to have a polarimeter for one of the Giant Magellan Telescope, one of the large telescopes, which is Giant Magellan Telescope. So the next generation, we have 3 different telescopes which are going to be built. One is ELT, which is going to be in northern part of Chile, and TMT, which is currently supposed to be in Mauna Kea, but I don't know where it's going to be built, and then GMT, which is also going to be in Chile. And all of them have exceptionally huge mirrors, like this is 24, and this is 30, and this is 39. So with this, we can get a lot of photons, and then we can do, because they have large collecting area, we can do polarimetry of fainter magnitudes, especially novae and supernovae objects. And currently, unfortunately, there are no first generation polarimetric instrument to any of these telescopes. So when I started working on 30-meter telescope, my intention was to understand like where we can have a polarimeter and whether it is possible. Because one of the challenges which we see with polarimetry is along with photon noise, atmospheric seeing, variable sky background, which are usually the noise sources you see in other spectroscopy or imaging technique, we also see polarization introduced or modified by the telescope. So what exactly happens is when you have the light going through your telescope, it gets reflected. So every reflection introduces polarization, which is basically because of Fresnel reflection coefficient. So when you have these kind of fold mirrors, but the angles of incidences are really high, you have high instrumental polarization coming into your system. That means if you're looking at an unpolarized star, instead of getting zero polarization, you measure non-zero, like 5% or 6% polarization, which is not your source, but it is from your telescope and the instrument itself, which actually reduces the accuracy of your measurement.
But it is on all the images, so that's easy to know.
Yeah, but you have to calibrate.
Okay.
Yeah. So larger is the angle of incidence, larger is these effects, and the way we get around it is by observing standard stars. So there are standard stars like unpolarized and polarized standard stars which have been observed, and they have the same level of polarization for many years. So that's what we use to calibrate right now. So for an unpolarized light, if you look at this and whatever we measure at the telescope focus, we call that as instrumental polarization. And sometimes the linearly polarized light coming from the star gets converted to circular. So whatever you measure at the telescope is elliptical instead of linear polarized light. So it's easier now because we have polarimeters at 2-meter class telescopes, and we have a lot of observing time which is accessible, and we can calibrate for it. But the problem with next generation large telescopes is we are not going to have so much of observation time for us to do these observations, because if you get one night of telescope data and you spend half of your night calibrating for these effects, it's not efficient. So the initial thought is how we can model this before, and we can predict, and we can say that, okay, this is what we expect from the model, and so this is at a level where our science cases can tolerate it. So that's what I started for TMT, and we spent understanding, like, because of this fold mirror, what's the level of polarization we get for any of these instrument ports, and how do they affect the science observations. So we also wrote up this huge report on how we had science cases, and we assessed those science cases based on the model and estimations we did. And then when I moved to UOA, since UOA is a partner in GMT, I also looked at whether we could have a polarimeter for Giant Magellan Telescope, because TMT was already in a controversial phase. So we got seed funding from University of Arizona Space Institute, and that's when we started thinking about the scientific and technical requirements for the GMT, and that's how I met Enrique. So we have these, we came up with list of science cases, like what all the science we can do with the Giant Magellan Telescope polarimeter, and we have wavelength and field of view, and what kind of brightness we are going to achieve, and what's the signal to noise we need, and the level of polarization. So we collected all these science cases into a document which is going to go on arXiv very soon. And then we also did modeling of instrumental polarization, like how much are the mirrors contributing to this polarization. So if you see in this plot, like most of the telescopes, like this is ELT, TMT, and GMT, all of them contribute considerable amount of instrumental polarization, and there is one port in GMT which is called the Gregorian focus, which is just the primary and secondary mirror, which introduces no instrumental polarization because it's a circularly on-axis system. So that's what we chose for suitable for polarimetry, because we don't have to do a lot of we don't have to spend a lot of time calibrating it. So we went through this exercise of, we have the science cases and we model the properties, and what is the path forward for having a polarimeter at GMT. So we looked at different instruments which were possible. Either we could have a separate PI instrument where which we could design just for GMT pole, but all the instrument ports were taken. And we also got in touch with the other first generation instruments called GMAX and Manifest to see if we could convert them into a polarimeter, but they were far beyond in the design stage. So finally we reached out to ComCam, which is a commissioning camera for GMT, which is this, and it is basically designed for evaluating the ground layer adaptive optics performance of the GMT. That means when you're commissioning, what is your image quality, just to assess that. So we reached out to them, and we realized that if we could actually put our polarimetric module in this space, then we can convert this into a polarimeter. And it had the requirements almost similar to what the requirements we were put together in the science cases. So currently we are working with 2 grad students and who are working on designing this module for the polarimeter, which can go into ComCam. And if that happens, then we could have a polarimeter on GMT as early as 2031. And so that's what is the status of polarimetry for GMT. I don't know if you want to ask me any questions.
The GMT exists right now?
No, they're building it, and commissioning is going to be in 2029, 2030.
It's replacing the old Magellan in the same place, or a different
No, it's a different location.
Different location.
Yeah. Do you have any questions before I move on to the Roman Space Telescope?
And this thing is an instrument that mounts on a telescope.
Yeah,
Like
so
it's like almost like a detector kind of thing.
yeah, so this is the camera, and this has a because it's just an imaging system, it has a collimator and just the camera. So if we can replace this module into a polarimetric module, then we can convert this into a polarimeter. Yeah.
So you mentioned about the PI instrument for GMT. So like all the focus are taken. So
I think so, because
there is no second generation instrument at all for GMT.
I mean, there might be, but they are all in the Nasmyth ports. Because currently in the Gregorian focus, I think they have 2 instruments, and 2 of them, one is ComCam and I don't remember the other one. But all the Nasmyth ports one have their own internal fold mirror. So the moment you add fold mirror, then
Yeah.
it's just as good as any other.
So in the plot that you have the instrumental polarization versus wave plane, this is in the focal plane.
Yeah, this is in the telescope focal plane.
Yeah, so these are ready for GMT. You're already taking into
Yeah,
account
so
the-
that's what. That's why I did the fold
The
mirror with
three
different
layers.
coatings, because the instrument can choose what coating to have for the fold mirror. So I just did with this gold, silver, and silicon, like protected silver plus silicon nitride, in order to see which one. So gold does worse as expected in optical. Yeah, but if you put it at the Gregorian port, because it's symmetric, nothing happens. Yeah.
I think the point here we're telling you like go to near infrared and you have 0.5.
Oh yeah, definitely. You can go to
That's great.
Yeah. I mean, near infrared is great.
Yeah, infrared.
Yeah.
But the problem is in the visible range, you have too much
Yeah.
contribution.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the polarization is usually very low, and you have an error of 4%.
10%, approaching 10.
Okay. So now I'm going to talk about Roman Space Telescope and the polarimetric module for the Roman coronagraph instrument. So this is the current Roman Space Telescope at Goddard, which has been assembled, and they have a pre-ship review in June, and after that it will be shipped to Florida. And this is the coronagraph instrument which I work on. So this has 2 instruments. Wide field imager is the prime instrument, and coronagraph is a technology demonstrator, but then it has different modes like spectroscopy, polarimetry, and imaging, which could be explored if we have extended period of observations. So to give you an introduction to high contrast imaging, so we have the light coming from the telescope and we image it and we get an airy disk from the star. And we add a coronagraph and the Leo stop to get rid of that imaging, that light. And then the light from the planet is focused at the same location, and we do something called as dark hole digging in order to get rid of those speckles and finally be able to get the spectra. I don't know if it's going to play again. Okay. So this is measured in terms of contrast, which is basically the brightness or ratio between an astronomical source, which is planet, to the star it orbits. So for example, if you are looking at a Jupiter-like planet, then we need a contrast of about 10 power minus 9 around a sun-like star. So currently, this is what we are getting with Hubble Space Telescope. We are able to image self-luminous planets which are in this region, and Roman coronagraph will be a stepping stone for us, which will be able to reach like 10 power minus 9, that is like Jupiter-like planets at 10 parsec. And the requirement for Roman is demonstrating that it can achieve 10 power minus 7 contrast, but the simulations currently show that it can go up to 10 power minus 9. So this is the optical layout for Roman. I don't want to go into detail. It has a lot of OAPs, which is off-axis parabolas, and a lot of fold mirrors, and we have different configuration of focal plane mask, Leo stop, as well as we have this module where we have a lens for imaging, prism for spectroscopy, and we also have a polarizer to do the polarimetric mode. So all these are on the linear stage, and they can select which coronagraph mask they are going to match with, which kind of like field stop they're going to have, and which kind of filter. And this is the total field of view for the instrument. So as I said, we have the requirement is only at 575 nanometer narrow field of view imaging mode, which is going to use a specific coronagraph called the hybrid Leo coronagraph. And once this requirement is satisfied, only then we have other filters and other modes which would be explored. And we have polarimetric mode at 575, both in narrow field of view and wide field of view, and also we have at 825 polarimetric mode is supported. So with this, we can look at a lot of exoplanets and a lot of circumstellar debris disks in both visible light as well as in the near infrared light. So in the case of Roman, the polarimetric module does not have a halfway plate. Instead, they have two Wollaston's on a linear stage. So with one Wollaston, they get I0, I90, and this is how the module is. And they have an exactly similar module, which will give us I45 and I135. So this is how they are going to appear on the detector plane. And this is the coronagraph scientist Vanessa Bailey, and this is how the Roman coronagraph looked before it was shipped off to Goddard. So I've been leading the polarimetry working group for Roman because the instrument was built at JPL, and it's currently going to be launched in the end of this year. So, but we had to plan a lot of stuff, starting from what sources we are going to observe, what kind of calibration we are going to do, and what kind of data reduction pipeline we need. So this is how the Roman coronagraph established this structure, which is called Community Participation Program, where we submitted proposals to NASA, and like 6 teams were selected in the first call, and the 3 teams were selected in the next call, and they were all divided into these 4 broad groups, where one is an observation planning working group, which specifically work on planning the observations, and there is one data reduction and simulation working group, which is developing the data reduction pipeline, and there is a hardware working group, which is taking care of what kind of hardware module we are going to use for commissioning and other observations, and we have polarimetry working group, which takes care of everything related to the polarimetric observing mode. So these are the 2 other people from NAOJ who lead the polarimetric working group with me. So as a first step, we wanted to verify whether the simulation, whether there is any requirement for polarization and what kind of polarization we can observe through Roman. So this is a simulation which I developed in 2023, where you simulate a circumstellar debris disk around a system, and then you put it through the entire instrument system. Like you convolve with the point spread function, and then you see what kind of noise you can add from the detector. And since it's going to be a space-based telescope, you have a lot of other noise sources which are coming here. And then finally, you estimate what kind of polarization fraction we can get. And so we also looked at the calibration plan, like what kind of calibration we are going to do, because even in the case of Roman Space Telescope, we are going to have instrumental polarization and crosstalk, and how we are going to calibrate that. So found standards what we are going to observe, both unpolarized and polarized standards. And since some of these standards which are observed from ground do not have observations at the same wavelength Roman is going to observe in, we did precursor observations, and then we used those percentages of polarization to predict what kind of errors we expect in the linear polarization fraction. So right now we can get, by using a certain set of polarization calibrators, we can go down to 1.6% and we can also go down to as low as 1%. Depends on what kind of polarization calibrators we choose. And we are also working on developing observing campaigns where we know what we are going to observe and when it is observable, because for the Roman coronagraph the schedulability depends on when WFI is doing the observations. If WFI is observing a galactic bulge, at the same time you cannot schedule your coronagraph observations. So we wanted to look at the observability and what kind of integration time we need in order to measure the certain level of polarization fraction. So currently we are developing these observing programs for the pole mode. So at last, once you have the data available from these observations, you also need a data reduction pipeline. So the imaging data reduction pipeline was developed long ago, but we wanted to make sure that we add all the modules related to the polarimetric mode. Like for example, in the case of imaging, you have only one image, and if you're doing flat calibration, you do only on that particular area. But whereas for polarimetry, since you have two images, you have to do the flat calibration at both of those regions. So we developed all those modules, like for example, where we apply the polarization flat, and then we also wanted to do exact, like the polarimetric data reduction, like how do you extract I0, I90 and I45, I135 and get the Stokes cube, and finally calculate what is the polarization fraction. So we developed all these over the last year to be able to do the polarimetric data reduction through Roman. And currently it is open source data reduction pipeline. And the good thing about Roman is the data has no proprietary period, so the data is going to be online. So if you want to go check out the data reduction pipeline and also all the other tools which are available for Roman, like for example exposure time estimates or observability window, any of those things, you can check it out. It's on the Roman Corgi GitHub repo. So the current status for Roman is the build integration test was done, and currently we are assuming that the launch is going to happen in the fall of 2026 and no later than May 2027. So we have a commissioning phase which is for 450 hours in the first 90 days after launch. So that's what we are going to do once the launch happens. We are going to do commission, like the required mode and then some of the goal modes. And then we have an observation phase for which we have been developing ops programs for the first 6 months. And then once, if these are successful and if NASA can provide more funding to continue this, then we will have extended period of observations for observing many other disks or exoplanets which we can do through Roman. Okay, so I think I'm done with the Roman talk. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer, or I can move on.
So the data you showed is just simulated data?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So what is 10% of observing time means?
So this is like on the total period of the 5-year mission. Like for example, after this happens in the extended phase, you have like for about 3 years. In that 10% of 3 years, coronagraph could get.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Because right now this is something which is baselined for like 22 hours for the next 1.5 years. But then because all these observations take exceptionally long time, because dark hole digging takes about 18 hours, and then like you have to, the slew time is like half an hour for you to go to a target star and then observe. So although it sounds like a lot, but you don't get a lot of science in that particular.
What's the diameter of the Roman?
It's 2 meters.
2, okay.
Yeah.
And compared to the ground base, you have access to some spectral parts like UV, etc., which you don't.
So Roman is not doing UV.
Yeah.
The bluest it goes to is 525 nanometers. but it has higher resolution. So the contrast we can get from ground is only like in the order of 10 power minus 6. But with Roman, the raw contrast is expected to be 10 power minus 7, and then we can do post-processing on those and get a factor of 10.
So in the ground you're losing it because of scattering in the atmosphere?
It's the turbulence,
Turbulence.
because you cannot correct for the, yeah. Yeah.
What do you intend to observe for your flats?
Oh, this one?
Yeah,
We are looking at Uranus and Neptune.
for flats.
Yeah, for flats. So we don't expect to do it more frequently because it doesn't have like non-sidereal tracking. So we want to do it like a couple of times to make sure that we have like the same error percentage. And so we took into account some of the polarization variation which happens on the surface of Uranus and Neptune. It looks like when you do the raster scanning of this to fill and then combine these images, we are able to get 1.4% like error in flat calibration. So I think it's good enough for the polarization precision we want.
And how frequently do you intend to do flats?
So that's the thing we haven't decided. So that's something we would figure out like doing after. So we have a calibration block after every observations, but we hope to reduce the number of calibrations. Like for example, the polarized and unpolarized standards we hope to reduce. In the same way for flat, we want to do couple of times and then see if it is not changing then. Yeah.
Is it possible to do any of this calibration on standard sources on Earth in the lab before you send it out?
So we have a checkout. So the thing with Roman coronagraph was they didn't have a lot of time to check all the modes on ground because the requirement is only to check only the one particular mode. So they checked that, but with all the other modes, they've just checked if the light is there on the detector. So everything else is unexplored. So we can do some kind of calibration, but that won't hold good once we go on sky because there is thermal variation, there is jitter, and there are other variations which happen in the spacecraft.
Zeroth order you should get on ground.
You mean just for flat or for?
Whatever, any, this fixed in the machine. Machine would expand, twist, whatever. But on ground, you already have it. You haven't sent it out, but it'll go at the end of the year. So machine is sitting here, right?
Don't hear your time.
They don't have enough time.
That's not enough time. Okay.
Yeah.
Where is the telescope? Is it in the same, generally same location as?
Yeah, it's in Goddard right now.
No,
and
no.
the on the sky, it's L2. L2.
Mhm.
It's in L2 position, Lagrange point L2.
I'm not understanding.
They're the same.
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 Same as JWST or?
Yes.
Yeah, same as
Lagrange
JWST.
too.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yep.
Okay.
That's where the gravity cancels or something like that.
Yeah, it's a
Moon, Earth.
yeah. The only thing is it's inaccessible. It's not like a Hubble where you can replay stuff.
Yeah.
this would apply also to JWST, but what fraction of the sky can you see from that location? And I mean for observing purposes to maintain resolution.
I think you have solar avoidance angle. I don't remember sun avoidance angle. I don't remember what exactly is the degree, but other than that, you should be able to access most part of the sky, except the sun avoidance angle, which could be like 30 degrees.
Do you know the order of magnitude of the avoidance angle? Is it a few degrees?
I
or
think it's like
50 degrees?
it's like 20 degrees. It should be around 20 to 30 degrees.
So you see
Yeah.
most of 4.
Yeah, you see most of the sky. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to move on the talk about the last project, which is the Astrophysics Pioneers mission called Puffins, which recently got selected in February. And so the Pioneers mission started in 2020 from NASA, which is intended to carry out compelling astrophysics science, mainly at a lower cost and using smaller hardware compared to middle explorer-like programs. So this mainly includes small sats and major balloon payloads and like payloads which can be attached to international space stations. The cost cap is $20 million, and the launch should happen within 4 years. It should be launch ready, and the last year is where we do commissioning and science observations. And currently there are 7 Pioneers mission, out of which two have been launched. So University of Arizona has like a lot of heritage with the Pioneers mission, because it is involved in two of the first selected Pioneers mission. One is called Pandora and other one is Aspera. So Pandora launched recently on Jan 11, 2026. It's going to look at exoplanets and stars and try to get their transit spectroscopy. And the Mission Operations Center is at U of A, and part of the science team, Daniel Appai, is at U of A. And Aspera is based at U of A. The PI is Carlos Vargas, who is from University of Arizona, and even the deputy PI. So Aspera is going to launch in the fall of this year, and it wants to examine hot gas in the space between the galaxies, and called the intergalactic medium, and they want to characterize these galaxies. And they're looking at 106 wavelength region in the oxygen 6 line. So when we started, so since I am an instrument builder, I thought, oh, we need to have a UV spectropolarimeter, because when I looked back and looked at all the UV spectropolarimetry missions in the last 30 years, I see that the last one was in 1999, and unfortunately we haven't had anything in the last 25 years. So, but there are a lot of science cases. The white papers have been submitted. There are a lot of even in the Astro 2010 decadal, there are mention of UV spectropolarimetry, and also 2020. But no, either they are not getting funded, or either maybe people are not proposing. So I didn't understand what was the issue, but I knew I wanted to build a UV spectropolarimeter. So I had all these list of science cases, and this started back in 2023. And then I also went through decadal survey to understand like where exactly we need UV spectropolarimetry, where are the technological gaps. But since I am not a person who is an expert in one particular area of science, so I reached out to all the experts who have been doing polarimetry for quite some time in different fields. For example, interstellar dust, on galaxies, AGNs, etc. And I told them that give me one science case which can be done with small sat, and then I'll see. And this is what a small sat mission can do. Like for example, in most of the cases where you design an instrument, or like an entire observation, like you're putting an instrument together, you say, oh, this is a science case we are going to solve, and this is the instrument I'm going to build. But this kind of had in kind of complementary, like kind of tangent, like I said, okay, this is a small sat mission, and I can do only so much technologically, because it's not going to be there for many years, and it has to be one focused science case. So so everyone came with a list of science cases and the science requirements, and we did a down select, and finally we selected that we are going to do interstellar dust. So Puffin stand for polarimetry in ultraviolet to find features in interstellar dust, and we are going to measure linear Stokes Q and U, and we are going to observe in 1800 to 3200 angstrom of wavelength. And the features we are going to look for in stellar dust is these interesting features called super Surkowski and polarized pump, especially happening in the UV wavelength regions. And so we are going to look at sample of bright stars. So this is the Puffin's team, and this is very small set of the team. There are still an elaborate people I'm missing, and all the people who are in the pink color are the ones who are early career researchers. So we have a lot of them, and we also have a lot of people who have been working on either space-based missions or interstellar polarimetry for many decades. So we have a mix of both experienced researchers as well as a lot of early career people. So what are we going to do with Puffins? So this is the two missions I was talking to you about. Like the last UV spectropolarimetry mission was WUPI, which is Wisconsin UV photopolarimetry experiment, which flew on NASA Space Shuttle missions. And there was also WISP, which was a sounding rocket experiment. And then the last few years, what we have been using is the faint object camera on the Hubble Space Telescope, which is extremely oversubscribed. So these were the observations which were obtained with WUPI when the observations happened in 1990s. And the interesting features WUPI found were this, that in 7%, in 25% of WUPI targets, you see this super Tsiolkovsky polarization. What exactly is this? Is when we observed polarization from interstellar dust and we plotted against the wavelength. This is inverse wavelength, by the way. So this is UV and this is optical and this is infrared. So when we plotted it, it follows an empirical law called Tsiolkovsky's law. So that is what was expected, because in optical and near infrared it was behaving like that. But when Whoopi did its observations, in 25% of its target, you see an increased polarization and you don't seem to follow this law. And similarly, in some of the cases, we saw a bump in 7% of the targets. That there was a bump at 2175 where we see a strong extinction features. But we don't have enough data to understand why this is happening and what is the reason for it. So as I said, sample size was too small, and so conclusive test of grain theory alignment could not be done. So either we are not considering smaller dust grains in the interstellar dust composition, which we have ignored for a while, and we don't know what kind of composition they have and what is their contribution in actually making this interstellar polarization go up. So that's what we hope to solve with puffins. So the 3 science objectives were, we want to look at why super Tsiolkovsky polarization is happening in UV, and why is there an increased polarized bump at 2175, whether it has any relation with extinction. Because it has so happened that somewhere you have seen high extinction, you have also, but it's not correlated with you have seen high polarization at the same place. So there is a missing piece which we hope to fill. And at last, we want to do a survey of UV polarization targets in order to, because till now we have not explored UV spectropolarimetry space at all. So this is the first time we want to do a survey. So 70 is our base minimum, but we want to do it as much as the observing time we can get on sky. So these are the nominal target candidates. We have most of them in the galactic at 0 degree latitude, and we also will look at some targets in LMC and SMC. And along with that, we also have standards because we want to calibrate our polarimeter. So these are the science requirements, which is in a very basic format. So we want to have all sky accessible, and it's a single slit field of view, and 30 arcsecond by 30 arcsecond is the field of view, and it has a spectral range of 1800 to 3200. And the resolving power we need is very less because we just want to make this interstellar polarization curve. And we have the requirement on what is the SNR we need. So when we designed puffins, we made certain design choices. For example, we want to use a well-known and a widely used design, because since Pioneers are a very low cost, high risk missions, and they have to happen within the 5 years, we cannot have a lot of time for technology development. So we wanted to go with a rotatable zero order half wave retarder and a Wollaston prism and a flat grating, all of them in the collimated beam, very simple optical design. And we wanted to use all the optics which are space qualified, which have been tested in the environment before. And we wanted to avoid large angle of incidences so that we reduce time on calibration, and we used aluminum plus matte fluoride mirrors to have high throughput in UV. And we had decided that we want to fit into this bus from SFL, the Spaceflight Laboratory, which I'm going to show the bus. And we wanted to fit the entire payload into this because we knew that the spacecraft bus has a certain budget, and that's what we can accommodate in our $20 million budget. So this is the optical design of puffins. It's a very small mirror, it's just 25 centimeter. And we also added a guider here in order to have good pointing stability and pointing accuracy. And this is the entire optical design. So we have 250 mm M1 and a 5 centimeter M2, and this is the F ratio. And then you have a modulator, which is the halfway plate, and a Wollaston prism, and we have a 4 mirror and grating, and then it is the detector. And for the detector, we have proposed to use a CMOS sensor, which is a 571 with a UV scintillator coating to have high throughput in UV. And this gives the effective area and the spectral resolution. So we have, these are the spectral resolution we require to achieve our scientific objectives, and we have sufficient margin for that after considering all the performance misalignments errors which we have in our system. So we also built an SNR calculator to see how much time we need, so that we also have like concept of operations. So this is the start of the day since launch, and we have 1 month for commissioning, and then we can complete most of our observations within like with sufficient 45% of margin in the observing time, which actually helps us that we can observe far more targets. So this is the complete assembled version of Puffins, the CAD model. This is the electronics box, and then this is where we have our instrument, and we have an aperture cover, and this is the baffle, and this is where we have incorporated this payload into the spacecraft bus, and the spacecraft bus was from SFL.
Why do you need the aperture cover?
Oh, this one, this is for avoid, if you're looking at a bright source, it should be able to close like as a sun sensor. You put a sun sensor, and then so that it's able to close immediately. Yeah.
What are the units? Millimeters?
Oh, this one, yes, millimeters. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. So it's not that we are going to do only UV polarimetry, because we want to construct this entire interstellar polarization curve. So we also want to do observations using optical, that is from ground based. So we have SPOL at U of A, which is a spectropolarimeter, and we also have collaboration with FiberPol, which can do spectropolarimetry with the 1.9 meter telescope in South Africa. So that's what we are going to construct this part of the curve from. And then I'm trying to recommission MMT pole for the MMT telescope at U of A, which can extend it to 1 to 5 micron. So our proposal is to fill this entire interstellar polarization curve. For as many observations we can do with Puffins, we get this entire wavelength coverage. So combined with ground-based spectropolarimetry, Puffin will address the key question about interaction between the interstellar dust grains and the environment, and they probe magnetic fields through UV polarization survey. And this can act as a test bed for HWO, because HWO is in 2040s, and if we don't have any UV instrument to test our performance, then it won't be great. So this is going to act as a test bed. So currently, this is the schedule, and we are in the formulation phase, going to be till 2028, and we'll start building in 2028 to launch in 2030. And so that's the end of my talk. And so I've talked about Roman chronograph instrument, which will have better contrast, and we can do optical polarimetry through that. And I talked about Puffins, which is filling the gap and going to serve as a precursor to HWO. And I also talked about a polarimetric capability for Giant Magellan Telescope. And thank you.
Thank you. Right. Any questions?
Yeah.
So I have one question related to aperture photometry.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're selecting an aperture, right, how do you select it, like whether to optimize the flux accumulation or to optimize the Stokes?
So you basically, when you're doing the reduction for imaging polarimetry, you do it as a conventional aperture photometry. Like you do the curve of growth, you select multiple apertures, and you have the curve of growth, and then you estimate. Like, because the reduction for that case, you don't look at the polarization percentage until the last step. So you're not trying to maximize your percentage polarization. You're trying to maximize your total counts.
Yeah, another, can I?
Sure.
So, you use standard unpolarized and polarized, right?
Standards,
so,
yeah.
So are their purpose the same for calibration, or in some cases like they use standard unpolarized just for the figuring out the instrumental polarization, and the standard polarized for increasing the efficiency, or so are the purpose the same?
So they don't serve the same purpose, because unpolarized is always observed as a bias level from your telescope and instrument, whatever you want to subtract it. So that has to be done. The polarized calibrators are observed. One, you want to know how much your telescope is modifying the polarization, because for unpolarized you just get the bias level, but you're not actually getting like how your linear is changing into something else, right? Because you're doing just a zero polarization standard. And the other thing why we also observe polarized standards is because we have a polarization angle at which this vector is. So it's always measured with respect to the instrument coordinate system. So, but you have observatories all around the world, and you have instruments on different platforms, and you have to convert all of them to one coordinate system. So when you observe these polarization standard, you don't exactly get the same polarization angle. So you try to look at the literature and try to correct for that angle, and that's what is your angle offset. So that's when you have the perfect linearly polarized standard, whatever the polarization you've observed. I don't know if I confused you more. You look confused. Okay.
I'm a little bit surprised that none of the instrumentation for polarimetry seems to, it's all macroscopic, none of it's done in the image plane with condensed matter effects for either for changing the sensitivity of the detector depending on polarization. Is there a way to understand that?
So I think that that can work for the millimeter. So right, so you use M-kits, for example, and then that's a nano. That's the detector itself is like what is measuring the polarization. In this point,
this is optical. Oh, you just put the detector to measure the polarization.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's millimeter wave. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's fine.
So what's the physics behind why we can't control sensitivity polarization in the image plane?
In the optical is a photon base. It's CCD. You use CCDs.
Yeah, we use CCDs, but we cannot actually get the information of polarization just by the detector in optical. You need a way to measure, like you need optical components to measure, like to tell you where the electric field vector is oscillating, right? Like,
I suppose I shouldn't be surprised, but I am.
Yeah, I think in the submillimeter you are measuring power, and here you're counting photons. So I think the way of measuring counting photons and power is different. So in the submillimeter you're counting power. If you're measuring power, you can use the detector itself. When you're counting photons, is what she's doing. So you are basically making the photon to go through some optical path to see how it's changing the variation, right?
So you're asking like the pixels themselves have no polarization sensitivity.
I
On the
don't.
detector.
Yeah, I don't think so. Not
Yeah.
big, but there are currently Sony is making CMOS sensors where the detector itself has sensitivity to polarization. Like if that is advanced, then but it is not at a level where we can use it for astronomy yet, because it can measure higher level of polarization, but not to the level of 2% or 5%. Like the pixels are arranged in such a way that you have a quadrant, and then you have two linear polarization and two like horizontal and vertical to measure at the same time. But we have used it in the lab, but it cannot be put at the telescope, if that's what you were asking. Yeah.
Any further question?
In the picture diagrams you showed, the mirror looked quite fat
Which
in the last puffin.
oh
Okay, we can go
Oh,
back
this
here.
one?
Yeah,
Yeah.
M1 is taking so much of your 46 or 36 centimeter space. Aren't there new ceramics or some oxides or whatever that can make a very thin mirror and take the
So-
bulk off? And
the thing with Pioneers is they want us to propose a design which has been tested, very well tested. So if we propose any novel design, then we have to space qualify it. So that's why we were going with like zero door mirrors, which have been flown before, which have been tested, and which work really good in radiative thermal environments. So I mean, we have to optimize the design. This was for the proposal, so we are going to do some modifications to the design, and we still have volume to fit in the spacecraft bus. So we can go for a bigger mirror and a thinner mirror as well. Yeah. I mean, I agree with your point. Yes, it is thick.
It reminds me of my teenage years in Calcutta when I used to hand grind
Yep.
8-inch diameter Pyrex disc
Yep.
to make telescopes. It
Yep.
looks like that,
Yep.
and that's 60 years ago.
Yep.
So what happened with M&T Pole? So like, who owns M&T Pole now? Is it still
Terry
PI or?
Terry Jones.
Yeah, but Terry retired.
Yeah, Terry retired, but he's still like semi-active, I think. So I have,
Really?
yeah, I talked to him during Puffins because he was a reviewer for one of like my Red Team review.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it has to be through Terry to get it back, but
Yeah.
it's still in like University of Minnesota, right?
Yes,
mean,
yeah,
yeah.
You need to carry that instrument.
Yeah, I think we
and
did
you have to
all the
put it back.
things, yeah, to put it in like a FedEx and bring it back, but it
Mhm.
hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Any other question?
Do you want to talk more about your
Later on,
question?
later on.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. Let's thank our speaker again.